Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another week of our show where we're talking all about feeding your family. And I am so excited because this week is the first week that I'm going to be having a guest on my show. And so I've been surveying a lot of the audience to kind of see what sort of things do you want to talk about. And I get tons of questions about baby food. So I am so excited that today we have a guest, and this is an author that I know some of you know, but her name is Amy Bentley, and she is the author of the book called Inventing Baby Food: Taste, Health, and the Industrialization of the American Diet. So Dr. Bentley is a professor, and she works in the Department of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health at New York University. And so her book, in one of the areas of expertise that she works in, is the history of food, including baby food. So the book, Inventing Baby Food, it was a finalist for a James Beard Award, and that recognizes authors who excel in culinary education, which she certainly does. So I'm thrilled that Dr. Bentley can join us today to talk about some of the social, cultural, as well as the historical context about a topic that I know a ton of our audience is really enthused about, and that's basically how we feed our babies. So you guys, with no further ado, I want to go ahead and welcome Dr. Amy Bentley, again, the author of Inventing Baby Food. So Amy, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Katie, I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And you're coming to us from New York today, where you said it's like you're wearing a tank top. It looks nice and warm there.
It's in the low 90s. We've gone from very cold spring-like weather to summer in about one day.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. As I said, our audience is really interested in all topics related to feeding their family, but we have a lot of our segment that's really interested in baby food. And so your book, which, again, if you guys want to check it out, you can go to inventingbabyfood.com. This book, I loved it because it explored the whole history of how the invention of commercial baby food, as you said, it shaped American notions of infancy, and it influenced us as parents, the whole kind of evolution, and as well as pediatricians, because you talk a lot about how pediatricians change their approach to introducing solid food. So I know as a dietitian and a mom of five small kids, I'm always curious about, when I see work like your body of work, what sparked your interest in exploring the history of baby food, and basically its invention as this like now major segment of the entire food industry and the baby industry. What got you started on this topic?
Yeah, well, I had a baby. So my baby, who is now 22 and about to graduate from college, when I had him, I did what everybody else of my demographic, overly educated middle class does, which is to read all the literature, find the latest information about baby feeding. I breastfed, I pumped at work, I did use formula when I needed it. But when it came time to start my baby on solids, I went to the grocery store and I just saw the rows and rows and varieties of baby food products out there. Just went on forever, and different brands, different combinations, different sizes. And I was struck by how curious this whole baby food aisle was. And I thought, well, now what did parents feed their babies before there was such a thing as baby food? And being a historian, being a food historian, I thought, well, wait a minute, I can figure that out. I can go back and research and try to answer these questions and develop this history of this product that was so interesting to me. One of the things that was interesting about it is that a little jar of applesauce, say, had the same ingredients as a larger jar of applesauce in the aisle next door, but it had a little baby's picture on it, and it was like 3 times as much. So that was interesting to me too, about the packaging, presenting, demonstrating of baby food, and the fact that it was this very, very heavily embedded ritual in American food and feeding practices.
So speaking of rituals, we all, go to our pediatrician. I know I felt the same way. I have my oldest daughter. I'm a dietitian. I teach nutrition. But I still went to my doctor, and I know 90% of physicians in this country have never had a nutrition class, and I took my doctor's advice. And so I've been talking a lot with our audience about, going to the pediatrician and the things that you hear and what feels right or doesn't feel right, and how do you weigh, medical expertise against your own gut instinct as a parent. And so one thing that our audience was sharing is a lot of frustration about fluctuations in the recommendations about when to start solid food. So it's like, is it 4 months? Is it 6 months? And why do these recommendations change? And I was wondering if you could shed some light for us on how the average age of starting the introduction of solid foods has changed in the last 100 or 150 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of started in the late 19th century, the 1880s, 1890s. I looked a lot of advice manual, home manual, etiquette manuals, cookbooks, and also medical literature. And in the 1880s, there wasn't such a thing called baby food. That there really wasn't this codified category of baby food. There was a category of soft food for infants, invalids, and the elderly. And there were some recipes about what you might feed a baby. They were mostly grain-based gruels or beef broth, scraped beef. And the advice manuals indicated that you shouldn't feed a baby until about a year of age, until teeth began to enter a baby's mouth, obviously. And also the other piece of advice was that you shouldn't feed your infant fruits and vegetables until about 2 years of age. So this was very interesting to me. It was very curious that this advice would be so different from the way that we think about feeding a baby now. And that's because there was a bunch of things going on in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And one of them was the invention of vitamins, or the discovery of vitamins. So it wasn't until in the 19 teens that scientists isolated things in the things we call vitamins. And of course, fruits and vegetables have a lot of vitamins in it. So it wasn't until the early 20th century that fruits and vegetables were thought to have a lot of food value. Once you enter the 20th century, you have industrialization of food, you have vitamins being discovered, you have the rise of the medical profession and pediatricians in particular, then you get a change in infant feeding advice. And the infant feeding advice shifts to advocating earlier introduction of foods for babies around 6 months of age and more fruits and vegetables earlier. And then that advice really dramatically changes until about the post-World War II, about the 1950s, 60s. The average age of introducing solids is about 4 to 6 weeks after birth. And baby food is the primary vehicle for feeding.
That blew my mind. Like, literally giving solid foods to a baby who's 1 or 2 months old seems so, it just flies in the face of what we hear now. Yeah. So now we're stuck on, most people agree, about 6 months seems to be, the World Health Organization, American Academy of Pediatrics. Do you think that's where it's going to stay? Is like, 'cause people say like, oh, you say 6 months now is a good time to introduce foods, but do you think it's going to stay there, just knowing a little bit about the trends of this industry?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to predict. And I think one thing that was reassuring to me about the book is that you see how the trends shift and change according to our notions about what is healthy food, what is good food for our bodies, what's our understanding of physiology. I think we've sort of settled on the idea that an infant's body can't really take solid food until about 4 to 6 months of age.
Okay, yeah. And I like that you mentioned the teeth earlier too, because teeth are a weird one. Like, a baby could be born with teeth or not get their teeth till they're 18 months old. It's like that clearly shouldn't be a prerequisite for eating food.
Yeah. A baby needs to sit up, a baby needs to swallow, a baby needs to be able to turn its head to indicate that it's full. Swallowing, digestion, all those things seem to come into place around 4 to 6 months. I think 6 months is the generally accepted idea about when to introduce solid foods. But like a week earlier, a week later,
it's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
But I think parents are very fixated on those dates because we were anxious about this practice. If you think about it, feeding a child is a very intimate, personal thing, especially for women. Our bodies feed babies in utero. Then if you breastfeed, your body is again feeding an infant. And so introducing solid food is this moment where you're separating from your child and you feel very responsible for the food that goes into the child's mouth. And so you want to do it right. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of advertising and pressure from family or friends or social class to do it in one particular way or another. And in the 1950s, to be a good mother meant to use commercial baby food, to introduce it about 1 week, 1 month of age, and to use formula. Now it's very different. Now we advocate breastfeeding, we advocate later introduction of food. But, we need to just also sort of relax about some of these rules too, and just realize that babies, if you give them food, if you give them love, shelter, warmth, they're very resilient. And so they'll be all right as long as you're just really covering the basics.
And it certainly is a really stressful time for parents because it's kind of easy going up until 6 months. Like it's breast milk or formula or some combination of the two, and you got it. And then after that is when things kind of get tricky. So you mentioned advertising, and another thing I was super surprised that I learned in your book, Inventing Baby Food, was that by the mid 1990s, the Gerber baby, you said, was the most recognizable icon in the United States. So I was wondering if you could tell our audience a little bit about the influential role that just a few of these, what are now really big food companies, have had over history in shaping, what the baby food aisle in a grocery store looks like today, or the fact that there even is a baby food aisle. How did kind of advertising and food industry play into that?
Sure. I mean, one of the purposes of the book is to use baby food as a case study for the industrialization of the American food supply in general. So the story of baby food is also the story of the American food supply, the industrialization of our food supply, the advertising, our consumption, our development of acclimation to industrial food tastes. So Gerber was one of the earliest and was always the most prominent commercial baby food maker. It started out in Michigan as a fruit canner. And in the 1920s, there's some folklore that goes around it. Some of it may be true. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but apparently, the Mrs. Gerber wanted her husband to puree some of the fruit that he canned so that it would be readily available for her infant, to feed her infant. And the product was so popular and caught on into the public's imagination so fast that it really increased in production. The Gerber manufacturer and other manufacturers as well, through the 1930s, through World War II period, even though there was an economic depression, women and others still wanted to purchase readily made commercial baby food. It was seen as this product that was valuable, that was scientific, that was trustworthy. The picture of that Gerber baby on the front was emblematic of love and nurture, and it was the advertising imbued authority and trust and confidence. And so it was very easily became the top-selling commercial baby food, and was one of the most widely recognized industrial food products in the United States.
Okay, so then we fast forward now, and another thing that I learned in Inventing Baby Food was that when it comes to pouches, that you said by 2013, and your book was published in 2014, so 1/3 of baby food was packaged in pouches, and I'm sure that's even more by now. So I'm curious, why have pouches become such a game changer in the entire baby food landscape?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, baby food was in the beginning, in the 1920s and 30s, it came in tin jars, canned jars. And then in about the 1930s or 40s, 50s, for some of the companies, they moved to the glass jar. And that glass jar was prominent through most of the rest of the 20th century. And it was small, it was attractive. You could see through it and see the contents, so that was reassuring. And then you could use the jar for other purposes. And so it really, really remained the gold standard until the early 2000s, when technology was available to create aluminum foil packages that had plastic coating on the inside and then the screw top. One of the points of my book is to show how baby food fits into American values and American lifestyles. So it allows women to be mobile. It allows them to go to the park and take the food with them. It allows them to go to work. It's one of these products that is emblematic of an American lifestyle. And the pouch just further accentuates this. Pouches are even more mobile. They're even more transportable. You don't even need to unscrew the top. You can just snap off the top. You don't even need a spoon. You can just hand it to the kid, and the kid can suck on it like a Slurpee or a yogurt pop or something. And so they are even more mobile. They're even more casual and user friendly. Now, some people worry about that and see that as a further decline in sort of teaching children how to eat properly, to use utensils, to sit at a table, to make dinner time conversation, to learn how to share. All that we learn a lot of things through food. We learn a lot of things through eating together. And so some people worry that the pouch only further de-emphasizes those values.
Yeah, and we also talk about sometimes from a developmental standpoint when it comes to pouches, like is sucking a necessary component of learning how to eat. And actually, next week on the show, I'm having a speech therapist who's a feeding expert, and they are notoriously anti-pouch, anti-pacifier, anti-sippy cup. I'm like, oh my gosh. But I think it's interesting to hear like the impact that has on the palate, especially for parents who are starting these, really soon. But also if you think about it from a cost standpoint, like the average pouch after tax, at least in Southern California where I live, is about $2. So I was kind of doing the math, and one of the statistics from your book was that by the mid 70s that the average baby was having 72 dozen jars of baby food in the first year of their life, which is close to like 900 jars of baby food, which in today's dollars would be like almost $2,000 of baby food. Now, I have baby quadruplets, and I'm very frugal. There's no way I'm dropping $8,000 a year on feeding them something that is all pureed. And I really value the importance of purees in the development and learning how to eat. But I think so often many parents think it's the only thing their baby can eat, and they stay on them for way too long. So you touched in your book a little bit about baby-led weaning, which is an area that a lot of our following is interested in. It's certainly a current trend in baby food feeding as far as the term goes, but of course it has origins rooted, generations ago. And that's what I love about your book is like, we have been feeding babies for generations, but why has this whole commercial baby food industry really only existed for about 100 years? So I know your kids are older, but let's say you did have a baby here in 2017. I'm curious, knowing what you do about baby food, what would your approach be to feeding your baby? Would you do straight purees? Would you do hardcore baby-led weaning, no purees? Or would you do some sort of modification? Just curious where you stand on that today.
I think any parent knows that parenting is not a science, but an art. Like, we can try to control and predict everything, but then the kid does what he or she wants to do. So some kids are really easy eaters. Some kids are pickier. Some kids have an issue with texture. So I think it really depends on, your child, and then also yourself and your lifestyle, and also what you value as important. Some women really find a lot of satisfaction and self gratification through making all of their own baby food. That's very important to them. Other women say, I don't have the time, I don't have the interest. There's perfectly acceptable baby food out there. I'm going to use that. Some people don't want to, for one reason or another, to use pureed baby food, and find skipping that category altogether appealing. In other words, once upon a time, there wasn't such a thing as baby food. We didn't have this period of months where we fed our kids pureed. And so we can go back to that and bypass it and just start on, little crumbled up bits of food and stick it on the high chair and let the baby fend for themselves. I had 3 kids, and you can do a lot with when you only have 1 kid. And then when you have the third, it's very hard to be controlling. So we kind of did a mixture of baby food and then baby-led weaning, although it wasn't really called that at the time, where we would just take our dinner and put it on our high chair and let her eat it. And, I think there's a value in, there's sort of a logic to moving from an all-liquid diet to a pureed diet, in terms of texture, in terms of helping a child get used to thicker uh, substances. And so I get a stage that is mostly puree. I get moving from formula and breast milk to purees and then moving on to more solid food. However, there's no, I think there's some evidence out there that shows baby led weaning is fine if the child is healthy, the child doesn't have swallowing problems or, GI problems. And so I think it really, whatever works for your kid. There's a lot of puree type foods that are actually really good that adults eat too. So we eat oatmeal, right? We eat bananas, we eat avocados. Those are almost puree type substances that are, I think, really good first foods. And so even if you don't want to necessarily grind up meat, you can still give children, infants, soft substances that are going to be a good transition into solids.
And
that's my philosophy.
And I think one thing that you mentioned is that you said months for the puree, and that's something that I find when I work with a lot of families in the baby-led weaning space, teaching them how to do it. And with alternatives, so many of them get stuck doing months of purees and purees for days or weeks, but you definitely you feed a baby full fat yogurt, and that's certainly a pureed texture. So I have a resource for our audience if you are interested in baby led weaning and you do want to learn a little bit more about some of the first foods. I've got a list of my 10 favorite finger foods for starting baby led weaning, and you guys can download that if you go to firstfingerfoods.com. And if you want to learn more about Dr. Bentley's book, then check out inventingbabyfood.com. So I want to leave with one more question. You mentioned kind of the stress around feeding, and our audience does cite feeding solid foods is one of the most stressful times in the first year of a baby's life. So do you have any parting advice for parents and caregivers when they're faced with this overwhelming variety and ever-increasing array of all these kind of crazy things in the baby food aisle? How should they approach it from a balanced sense for like nutritional purposes, but also for their own mental health?
Yeah. Try to take a deep breath, relax, and try to have fun with it. Think of it as an exploration, a journey that's exciting and interesting. Try to remember that it takes a kid an average of 10 to 12 encounters with the food to even feel comfortable with it. They might not even want to touch it for the first 10 times. Talk about food in front of your infant, how delicious it is, how much you're enjoying it. Eat a variety of fruits and vegetables yourself. Enjoy different tastes and textures of healthy food. Make that a family habit. Try not to stress a kid out about food. I think that's the worst thing you can do is if you're hovering over that kid and going, eat, eat. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? That will only further stress out a kid and further create stressful moments over eating. You want mealtime to be an enjoyable time, a pleasurable time, a time to get together with your child, to enjoy healthy, delicious, beautiful foods. And then I think the problems will take care of themselves.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Again, everyone, this is Dr. Amy Bentley. Her book is Inventing Baby Food. You can check out the book and learn more about her work at inventingbabyfood.com. And if you're interested in those first finger foods for baby-led weaning, go check out firstfingerfoods.com. So thank you again, Dr. Bentley, for joining us. And we'll see you guys all next week when we're going to be talking about gagging and why it's an important part of learning how to eat.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.